Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grid Live Wrap-Up. NASCAR had a wild night at Daytona with a surprise winner throwing the playoff grid into pure chaos. Could we really see a title fight in Formula One? Lando Norris spoiled Max Verstappen's homecoming at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. Hello to everyone watching. I'm Ben Schneider from Grid Encore and NASCAR.info. With me is Kobe Lambus from Grid Tonight, and making her Grid Network debut, Linnea Jackson from UCLA Radio. Linnea, welcome to Grid Network. We're excited to have you join our team.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and cover all of the racing that happened last week.
Yeah, lots to talk about, so we'll get into it here in just a moment. But first, as always, a big thank you to our Patreon supporters, Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. You too can invest in the Grid Network if you like what you see this evening. There's a link to our Patreon in the description box below. Or if you'd rather make a one-time donation instead, we have the Super Chats enabled on YouTube now as well. Or you can visit Buy Me a Coffee. Those are also appreciated, and we will thank you on the air regardless. Now, I'm going to throw it over to Kobe to get started here. We were on site at Portland International Raceway this weekend for the BitNile.com Grand Prix of Portland. One driver doing what he needed to do to keep his title hopes alive. Kobe, let's get started.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, been quite a weekend at the BitNile.com Grand Prix of Portland. Like you said, one driver did exactly what he needed to do as he tries to keep his title hopes alive. And so all the title contenders came to Portland chasing one man, Alex Palou from Chip Ganassi Racing, who was at the top of the championship, and all of those drivers who were chasing Palou, they needed to have a better day than the number 10 team. However, only one driver bested Palou in Portland at the start. Team Penske's Will Power got around Santino Ferrucci on the first lap, heading down into the Sheldon chicane and never looked back. During the final stint, Power took a risk by running on the Firestone red tires, which produced more wear over the stint, while Palou ran on blacks. That doesn't wear as quickly, and at one point, Palou was literally right behind Power, but Power really opened up to a nearly 10-second lead as he ended up taking the checkered flag, winning this year's Grand Prix of Portland. So, Ben, did Will Power make a huge statement today to Alex Palou that he shouldn't feel comfortable with his now 54-point lead?
Well, I had the right idea on the pre-race show earlier today that somebody would make Alex Palou recognize that he shouldn't count his chickens before they hatch here. I thought it was going to be Scott Dixon. I was very quickly proven wrong. Dixon at the complete opposite end, rather, of the result sheet here today, and we'll get into that later on in this segment. But for Will Power, he was the champion of this series, one of the veterans that is, again, showing Alex Palou that it's not as easy as it may seem to close the deal here. I still think Palou should be slightly favored. You could certainly say Palou is stronger on the road courses than he is on the ovals, but he's by no means a slouch on the ovals either. I wouldn't put it past him to go out and have some strong runs over these last few races. But when you have somebody like Will Power, who you could probably say was in a very similar position to Palou several years ago, coming from the Champ Car Road and taking a while to get up to speed on the ovals. Of course, nowadays we know Will has said he wouldn't care if the whole season was ovals. He loves racing on the high banks and those kinds of tracks. But with Power's experience and being somebody that enjoys the ovals now, comparing that to Palou, maybe the 54-point lead isn't quite as comfortable for Palou as it would be if we had 3 road courses to finish out the season. So it's going to be an interesting title dynamic here as Palou tries to eventually lock up his championship, if not before the final race, during the final race, and seal a championship here. But with Will Power closing the gap, it's certainly going to be easier said than done.
Yeah, for sure. And talk about an epic beatdown, right? Will Power absolutely dominated this race, and one of the most dominant performances that we've seen in quite some time in IndyCar. But I do argue Colton Herta's dominant Toronto win was also in that same ballpark. This was a 110 lap race. Will Power led over 100 laps of this race, just to put it into perspective of how dominant today was. So I think that this was absolutely a massive statement to Alex Palou, because the rest of this way, Alex Palou, he's going to be playing on defense. Will Power, he gets to be aggressive. He gets to play on offense, and he gets to put a lot of pressure on Palou. And I think the biggest thing that we're going to be looking at coming down the stretch here is Will Power when he goes on offense. Is he going to force Palou into making a mistake? You rarely see Palou make a mental error on the track. But I wonder now, going to ovals. Now we'll talk a little bit about Palou and ovals in a minute. We all know Will Power. He knows how to get it done on those oval tracks. He's one of those time and time again. And I really believe that although Alex Palou did have a really good day today, I think all the momentum right now heading into the Milwaukee doubleheader is on the side of Team Penske's Will Power. And like I said, now we have 2 race weekends left and 3 races to go. Two short oval races at the Milwaukee Mile and the season finale at Nashville Super Speedway. Power is an experienced oval racer who has a handful of oval wins. Palou has run enough ovals in his career to have the experience, and he's not bad on ovals at all. So when we talk about ovals being a weakness of Palou, we're not saying that he's terrible at ovals. He's not terrible at all. He just hasn't found victory lane yet. Yeah, and that's the growing elephant in the room as Palou still seeks his first oval win during the most important part of the 2024 season. So here's my question for you, Ben. Do the final 3 races favor Power over Palou, and do you have confidence that Palou will be able to hang on to this championship?
Yeah, again, it's kind of wild to think about if you were talking about this 10 or 15 years ago and saying a championship battle that ends with 3 consecutive ovals is going to favor Will Power. Probably you'd have a lot of people disagreeing with that take, especially against a driver like Dario Franchitti, as Will had to go up against for so many battles early in his career. But now, like I mentioned, that Will is a little bit more matured and certainly more seasoned veteran on these ovals here. I think, yeah, he should be considered a slight favorite here in terms of getting the higher finishes. Now, the caveat to that is, of course, Palou has the 54-point advantage, and there's only 3 races left for Power to make up that ground here. So it's by no means going to be an easy sort of feat here. Palou could finish 5th in all 3 of these races here. Power could win all 3 of them. That would get him just over the edge to take this championship still. So Palou still has to go out and perform, assuming Power is going to maximize his potential here as well. So it's by no means, out of Power's reach. He certainly has an opportunity, but you do, I think, have to give a slight edge to Palou when it comes to the likelihood of who's going to win this championship. I'd say Power's favored to close the gap, no doubt. But in terms of if I had to make a pick today, who's going to be the champion, I still give a slight edge to Palou, assuming that he can go out and maybe not win one of these final 3 races, but at least be flirting with the podium and be in a solid position not to lose too many points to Power here at Milwaukee and when we end the season at Nashville.
Yeah, definitely. Like you say, Ben, I think that the chances of Palou winning the championship are still fantastic because we've seen throughout Alex Palou's IndyCar career, one thing that we see from him is consistency, because he is a very consistent driver. You remember he had that very long top 10 streak that was snapped, when we had that chaotic race on the streets of Detroit. And since then, Palou's gotten back to his consistent ways. I think if Palou can be consistent, for these final 3 races of the season, get out of both Milwaukee races, with the top 5 finish, top 10 finish, maybe you'll have Will Power run into some trouble along the way. I'm sure Palou hopes he's not one of the ones running into trouble. And then if he can just be consistent like that, he can definitely hang on to his championship. But like we were saying, Ben, Will Power certainly has the capability of closing the gap, and we know he's going to be going all out these final 3 races because he, like I was saying, he's going to be on offense. He's going to be all fired up. He has all the momentum heading into Milwaukee, and we'll see what Power is able to do with all of that momentum. I think this championship fight is far from over. Anything is possible, and I think Palou is really going to be feeling some of the pressure from Will Power. But we know Palou is very is very, very strong on the track, performance wise and mentally as well. So he's definitely going to be tough to beat despite Power's hard charge as we close out the season. And as I previously said, Palou leaves Portland with a 54-point lead over Power. Colton Herta dropped from 2nd to 3rd in points after finishing 4th. He's now 67 points back and after starting toward the back of the pack due to a grid penalty. Scott McLaughlin recovered to finish 7th, but McLaughlin is facing an 88-point deficit as Scott Dixon fell down to 5th, 101 points back, and more on Scott Dixon in a little while. So is the championship game over for Herta and McLaughlin?
I think so. I mean, Dixon for sure. He might not be mathematically eliminated, but this wasn't he might as well have stayed home today with how many points he lost. McLaughlin, I think 88 back, only 13 better than Dixon. I think that's certainly, again, not mathematically eliminated, but I mean, it would take a lot of help from those ahead of him falling out, not just Palou even, but even I think Power and Colton Herta would need to have some trouble for McLaughlin to be able to make that up entirely. But Colton Herta, 67 back. If we had 3 road courses coming up, I would say he's still a long shot. But as I said on the pre-race show earlier this afternoon, when you talk about Palou not having a win on an oval, Colton Herta still doesn't have a podium on an oval. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I would put it past Colton Herta to finally achieve that and get a podium here in one of these final 3 races. But I just don't think he's shown as much on the ovals as he has on the road courses throughout his career to make me think that he can make up 67 points on Alex Palou of all people. With 3 races to go, I think you can probably say it's championship done for him as well.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add there. And before I get into mine, so I got a comment here from Adam Limmery saying, you think Alex Palou has one hand on the championship? Well, Adam, I'm actually not going to go as far to say that right now. Maybe we get through the first race at Milwaukee and see what the points gap looks like. And then depending on how well that goes or how poorly it goes maybe I'll be able to, fully agree with you that he has one hand on the championship. But the drivers just mentioned, Herta, McLaughlin, I don't really think that they're going to be a threat for the championship unless Will Power and Alex Palou just have a very bad weekend in Milwaukee. Like you said, Ben, Colton Herta, just like Alex Palou still has a little bit of proven to do on the oval tracks. Palou still needs to go out there and win one. I remember for the longest time we kept saying, when is Joseph Newgarden finally going to win the Indy 500? He's done everything else there is in IndyCar but win Indy 500. Look what he's done in back-to-back years. And I'm sure by now Alex Palou is going to get sick and tired of us in the media talking about his inability to win on an oval track yet. And I'm sure once he finally gets that made no oval win, that's going to be a weight lift off of his shoulder. And for Colton Herta, like I said, still needs to get up there on the podium at an oval. So that's something he'll be working to achieve. And looking at Scott McLaughlin as well, 88 points back. Could you imagine where things would be right now if Scott McLaughlin never received that penalty at the beginning of the year in St. Pete? It would have been a lot closer right now. I'm not going to do the math right now to see like where he would be right now, championship wise, if he didn't get disqualified from the season opening race. But I have to imagine, McLaughlin would probably have an outside chance of still winning this championship if it wasn't for that. So real unfortunate situation there. It just shows what happened at the beginning of the year come back to bite McLaughlin at the end. And one of the drivers who was definitely in the championship hunt in Portland, Scott Dixon, still in the prime position for the championship if his Chip Ganassi racing teammate Alex Palou stumbled. However, it really seems like Scott Dixon's title hopes were dashed after the lap 1 incident took him out of the race. Like you said, Ben, based on what we saw today from Dixon, he probably would have been best, just to stay home because it was lap 1, day over for the Iceman as Dixon got knocked off course into the grass by Kyle Kirkwood. Then Pietro Fittipaldi finished him off by knocking Dixon off track hard into the wall. Fittipaldi was the one who received a penalty for avoidable contact. But when Dixon was interviewed by NBC Sports, he said that Kyle Kirkwood is the one who should have been penalized, not Fittipaldi. So Dixon was in disagreement with who was penalized there. So Ben, after watching the incident yourself, do you agree with Dixon's assessment that Kyle Kirkwood is the one who should have been penalized instead of Pietro Fittipaldi?
It's a tough one because I look at it and I feel like maybe there's an angle that I haven't seen, and obviously Scott has a different perspective driving the car. I think it was David Land who tweeted if Fittipaldi rather gets a penalty for that, then that would be an absolutely terrible call. Obviously, that's what happened there, so you know how he feels about that. I guess what I would say is I didn't necessarily have an issue with Fittipaldi being penalized for his move, but if he was deemed deserving of a penalty, then absolutely Kyle Kirkwood should have been deserving of a penalty as well. And if you could only penalize one driver in this situation, I think Kirkwood was the one who started it. Dixon was just trying to gather it back up. Fittipaldi was admittedly in a difficult position here. You could maybe say the move that he made was a little aggressive for the opening lap, but at the same time, you could also probably argue that he had nowhere else to go with the speed difference that the two cars had there. So I don't know. I think that there's certainly a couple of different layers to this and sides that somebody could take here, but for Fittipaldi to get the penalty and Kirkwood to get away with it with nothing at all, I do have a bit of an issue with that for sure.
And it just goes back to what we've been talking about all year long, Ben, the inconsistency with IndyCar race control. And this was another, case of like why you call a penalty on this driver and why the no call over here on Kyle Kirkwood, still doesn't really make any sense to me. And like you were saying, the way I saw it, I actually disagree with the penalty on Fittipaldi, so I'm in agreement with Dixon there. Because like, where is Fittipaldi supposed to go with that? Like, I didn't really think in that situation there wasn't anything that Fittipaldi could have done there. Like you were saying, Ben, he was just carrying, just way too much speed, and he was just in a bad spot with the amount of speed that he was carrying. But you also bring up a good point as well, that probably a little aggressive, to be going like that during that time of the race. And if you were watching NBC broadcast, even even James Hinchcliffe and Townsend Bell, they were in disagreement over the penalty as well. They were arguing back and forth for a little bit before they just decided to move on. Just an unfortunate situation for Scott Dixon to have his race ended before even completing a single lap at Portland. And Pietro Fittipaldi, it seemed like he was on track to have a really good day in what's been a difficult year for him. But unfortunately, penalty really put him back throughout the race, and he spent the rest of the race trying to play catch up since it was a relatively clean race. But one questionable moment that occurred involved Roman Grosjean, who spun at the Sheldon chicane. When Grosjean got the car refired, he looped the car back around into oncoming traffic, where he was then turned around by Christian Rasmussen. And it's a shame for Grosjean and that whole number 77 Juncos Hollinger racing team, because Grosjean was having a really good run inside the top 5. And it was also Rasmussen's final IndyCar race of the season before Ed Carpenter finishes out the year on the ovals. Race control gave Grosjean a drive-through penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct. I feel like we don't really see unsportsmanlike conduct called too often in IndyCar races. So, Ben, how dangerous were Grosjean's actions?
Well, it wasn't great. I mean, I was with forget if it was Townsend or James in the booth, but just like, what are you doing? I mean, just to loop the car around and not be aware that you're in a motor race and there's oncoming traffic, oncoming cars that are going to be taking the racing line up against the curb in the Shelton chicane there. Just a completely brain dead move, I think, from Roman Grosjean. And like you said, Kobe, it was a shame because the good Grosjean was having a good run, but the bad Grosjean rose from the ashes. Somebody tweeted that. Forgive me, I'm not going to give the attribution there because I forget who it was, but it was really unfortunate because he had a good qualifying run. It looked like he was on pace. Juncos Hollinger Racing was on pace for a good finish, one of their better finishes of the year, and he just made a mistake, couldn't close the deal out. But then he added insult to injury by pulling out in front of the racing groove and getting spun around again. And then he did it again, second time there. So, it's just an unfortunate situation. But at the same time, if you're Grosjean, I think, it was absolutely a justifiable, deserved penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct, because certainly a veteran driver like him with as much experience as he has in single-seater open wheel racing, you've got to be smarter than that.
Yeah, definitely. And going through my mind when I saw this, I was thinking, Grosjean, you should really know better by now, given all the experience he has in Formula One. Didn't have a few years of IndyCar under his belt now. I just couldn't believe when I saw him looping around. I was thinking, don't do it. Yeah, but he did it. And like I said, unfortunately, ruined Christian Rasmussen's day as well. I'm sure Rasmussen wanted to end his final IndyCar race this year, on a high note heading into next year. Yeah, but it was an unfortunate situation to happen. But I do think that race control got it right when they called the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on Grosjean there. Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what Grosjean's future looks like, because I was reading an article earlier in the week from motorsport.com, and the co-owner Ricardo Juncos was saying, the team absolutely loves Grosjean and they want to bring him back into the future, because as you can see, it seems like he's had an influence on that car, because with Juncos Hollinger Racing, since they've gone full time in IndyCar, they've slowly gotten better over time. And it seems like, since when they added Grosjean this year, although the results, don't necessarily reflect the speed we've seen in this car, it really seems like that, this team is headed in the right direction. And Ricardo Juncos was given a lot of credit to Roman Grosjean and all his years of racing experience. So if this group can stay together, I think they could potentially build something special. And like I was saying at the beginning of the year, I thought Grosjean going to Juncos Hollinger Racing was an excellent move for him, because I think when he's with a large, with one of the top teams like Andretti Global, there's just a lot of pressure on him. And I don't think Grosjean does well when there's a lot of pressure on him to perform. I think with an underdog team like Juncos Hollinger Racing, that he has a better chance of going out there, and getting the results that he needs. Unfortunately, today wasn't one of those days where he got the result. Yeah, and Juncos also mentioned that Roman Grosjean has other offers for 2025, so we'll see where he goes in next season in the IndyCar series.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different layers to what's going to happen with Grosjean for sure, and excuse me, I don't think today certainly helped. It actually kind of reminded me of what we saw in a NASCAR race, and we'll get into NASCAR here in just a moment. But I think Corey LaJoie brought back some Kevin LePage memories, nearly pulling out into the groove. Obviously, thankfully, we didn't have a situation like that last night. But kind of a mini version of that here. Obviously, the speeds aren't nearly as high, and it didn't affect nearly as many cars, but you got to be smarter than that if you're Roman Grosjean in that situation for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, we'll close out our coverage from the Grand Prix of Portland, and now we're gonna bring on Linnea to lead our NASCAR section.
Great, thank you so much. There's a lot to cover, so we'll jump straight into it. Last night's Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona provided one of the biggest upset wins in the era of NASCAR Cup Series Playoffs. Entering the race 34th in points, lowest of all full-time Cup drivers, Harrison Burton got a big push from Parker Retzlaff on the last lap. Then he held off Kyle Busch to win his first career race in the Cup Series, and it was also the 100th race win for Wood Brothers Racing. While it was truly a historic win for one of NASCAR's most iconic teams, the win was bittersweet for Burton, who doesn't have a ride for next year. In Burton's post-race interview, he mentioned that he got fired from this job. So Ben, I'll direct my first question to you. Are you surprised that Harrison Burton was the one to give win number 100 to the Wood brothers? And does the win help his case for landing a new ride in 2025?
Yeah, I am a little surprised, but it was Harrison Burton. I didn't expect him to get a win before the year was over with how that car has been running with him in the driver's seat the last couple of years. But I certainly think it helps his case for next year. I don't know that he's going to be back in Cup, but I think he could certainly take kind of a John Hunter Nemechek road and try to go back to the Xfinity Series or maybe even back down to the Truck Series, wherever he has the best level of equipment and the best opportunity to prove himself and spend a couple more years there before maybe in 2027 or so, getting another opportunity in the Cup Series and trying to reinvent his Cup career, because it's certainly been a struggle for him the last few years in the 21 car. And, I know our friend, colleague Jackson Todd likes to make the argument, you have to give drivers about 100 starts to see where they're going to be at, what their potential might be in the NASCAR Cup Series. I think this was start 98 for Burton, and he got the job done with a race win here. So by no means do I think Harrison Burton's a bad driver or anything. He certainly proved it last night that he can get the job done and get to victory lane at the Cup Series level. But I do think potentially for him the next couple of years, if there isn't a great Cup Series opportunity lined up for him, and it sounds like those rides are certainly being taken, and that may not be the case, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world for him to go back down to Xfinity and try to rack up some more wins, compete for a championship there, and then we'll see what he can do in Cup again for a couple of years. But that aside, just looking at last night, Adam brings up a good point as well. The call from Lee Diffie was absolutely fantastic. Lee's first Cup race of any kind in 5 years in the booth. His first Cup race on the main broadcast, not doing the hot pass feed in 7 years. And it sounded like he never left. He had an absolutely fantastic, energetic call. Jeff Burton being up there in the booth, watching his son win the race, and Dale Jarrett having all those memories come back as well. He's a part of the NBC broadcast team. Jason Jarrett, his son, was spotting for Harrison Burton. So there's all sorts of family connections there, but you can point back to being full circle moments for this win. So it's certainly a feel-good story here. And then Lane Riggs, like Nicholas mentions here in the chat, a great story in the Truck Series today as well. We'll talk more about that on Encore tomorrow. But certainly a surprise win, to say the least, given where that car is in points. And we'll get into that here in just a second. But, nonetheless, that shouldn't take away from what is absolutely a feel-good story for a sport in a series that certainly needs one of those right now. So congratulations again to the entire Wood Brothers team.
Right. And then looking at the playoff picture heading into the regular season finale at Darlington, Burton slides into 13th on the playoff grid. The first driver without a win is Martin Truex Jr. in 14th, who is 58 points above the cut line. 15th is Ty Gibbs. He's 39 points to the good. Taking 16th and final spot for now is Chris Buescher. The first driver out is Bubba Wallace. The 2311 racing driver is 21 points below the cut line. Ross Chastain is 27 points below, and if things fall their way, Wallace and Chastain could make the playoffs on points. However, after that, every driver is below and is definitely in a must-win situation. Kyle Busch finished second at Daytona, one spot short for making the playoffs, and he's 106 points back and needs a Darlington miracle. Another thing to consider, the playoff picture could get even crazier if the final appeal officer puts Austin Dillon back into the postseason. So the next question I have is, what does Burton's win expose about the current playoff system? And which driver below the cut line entering Darlington has the best chance at making the playoffs?
I want to make this very, very clear, as if I haven't done so probably a half dozen times already. Maybe people just saw one or two of my tweets last night and not what I've tried to drive the point home for the last not quite 24 hours or so here. It is 100% a feel-good story. I cannot say enough how happy I am for Harrison Burton. This totally changes the picture for his career next season and where he's going to end up. It's huge for the Wood brothers. It's one of the biggest upset underdog victories we've seen in a very long time. I could not be happier for all of them. Okay, everybody got that? Harrison Burton was 34th in points, guys. There are 36 chartered entries here. There are 2 that use a rotation of drivers. It's 15 for Rick Ware, but 16 for colleague. And then it was Harrison Burton. He was literally the lowest ranked driver in the point standings full-time in NASCAR Cup competition this year. And because he won a wild card super speedway race, again, take nothing away from that. It is well-deserved. He went out, he outdrove a champion in Kyle Busch, passed him on the last lap to get the job done, thoroughly deserving of the win. Take nothing away from that. But that win alone now guarantees him, at minimum, a 16th place finish in the driver's standings. And I have a problem with that, because people who watch this show, people that watch my show, people who tune into this network, they know how I feel about this system. They know how I feel about how we crown a champion. But I also feel the same way about how we look at the standings overall. Where you rank in the final standings should be, relatively speaking, about your average position, your average running order over the course of a full year. If you finish 16th in points, people are going to look at that and assume you had about a 16th place car throughout the season. That was about where you ran on average. That's what the standings should represent to me. And Harrison Burton had 1 top 10 coming into this race. It was a 10th place, I think, at the other super speedway race at Talladega earlier this spring. It has not been the season that Harrison Burton and the Wood brothers would have liked to have had at all. They have been nowhere close to playoff contention, and this was the only way they were going to get in, was an absolute Hail Mary at what, for all intents and purposes, was their regular season finale, because I, again, think that the odds of Harrison Burton winning Darlington were probably much slimmer than they were him winning the race last night. That's the only reason that he's in the playoffs, and now he's going to be guaranteed to finish 16th in points. And I think that it can be both things. You can have the emotions. People were saying, oh, these playoff haters are just drowning out all the positive energy with their negativity here. You can be happy for Harrison Burton. You can be happy that we got a great storyline coming out of a night that maybe wasn't going to have that, with some of the flips and the crashes that we saw. We'll get into that later on here as well. You can be happy for all of that, and also come back to reality and acknowledge maybe we shouldn't have taken the top 30 rule away. Because if Harrison Burton did this even 2 or 3 years ago, we're having the same conversations that we had about Chris Buescher when he stole a win at Pocono in 2016 when the fog rolled in and they called that race. We're having the same conversations about Spire Motorsports on the owner's side of things when they stole the win with Justin Haley with the well-timed lightning strike at this very race in 2019 as well. These cars, these drivers in these situations here, again, take nothing away from their wins. They went and did what they had to do. They're trying the best with the limited resources that they have in many of these cases. But there's a reason why that top 30 rule existed. It was to prevent teams from the very back of the grid from taking a playoff spot from a driver that was higher up in the points that, to be quite frank, probably deserves it a little bit more based on their full season performance here. And again, nothing against Harrison Burton, nothing against the Wood brothers. It is a feel-good story. I cannot emphasize that enough. But that car and that team this year, with how they've been running, I don't think them finishing 16th in points, or maybe even a little bit higher, we'll see. Maybe this win will be a shot in the arm and knee. Maybe they turn things around and they'll go on a little bit of a run here in the playoffs. And if they do that, more power to them. But they're not really true championship contenders. And to me, it's just taking a playoff spot away. We probably have too many playoff spots to begin with, but that's a subject and discussion for another show, I think. I don't know. I have a problem with the absolute lowest ranked. This would be like a 2-15 NFL team winning their regular season finale, their Week 18 game, and then getting a wild card spot in the playoffs. It's just, and people that like the playoffs, they like to make stick and ball sports comparisons. There's one for you there. It's just, it bothers me for the integrity of the system that 21 team is taking up a playoff spot now over somebody like a Kyle Busch, who, although he has not had the season that we know Kyle Busch is capable of having, has been close to victory lane on a couple of occasions and is more likely to find the speed and turn things around late in the year to maybe go on a championship run than that 21 team is. So again, cannot emphasize enough. Congratulations to them. Job well done. But the reality is, it still bothers me as somebody who values the integrity of a full season points championship that car is going to be taking up a spot.
Right. I think there's definitely two conflicting sides, and I agree with what you said, Ben. And then also, as I previously mentioned, Burton's win wouldn't have been possible without a push from Xfinity Series regular Parker Retzlaff. He drove for Beard Motorsports, a team that has a technical alliance with Richard Childress Racing. Ironically, Retzlaff pushed Burton to the win and not Kyle Busch, who could have used some assistance from an RCR-built car. However, Retzlaff told Bob Pockras from Fox Sports that giving Burton the push was the number 62 Chevrolet's best chance at winning the race himself for Beard. Did Retzlaff make the right decision to think about himself in this moment, or was it a mistake to push Burton to the win, which ended up hurting Kyle Busch?
Well, first of all, I apologize. I got so fired up about the first part of that question, I forgot to answer the second, but I'll answer the second through this question here. I do think Kyle Busch probably has the best chance. We've seen the speed from RCR with Austin Dillon at Richmond and with Kyle just last night at Daytona. I think Kyle could potentially get his Hail Mary moment at Darlington this upcoming weekend. So he would be the one that potentially has the best chance of leapfrogging everybody and getting above the cut line here. Not to say that Ross Chastain or Bubba Wallace couldn't. I think they're certainly capable of it as well. But I think Kyle Busch might be trending in the right direction finally. We could potentially see that from him next weekend. But he had a shot last night. And I know that there were some radio communications with Retzlaff, who, by the way, let's give a call to him as well. Only his second start in the Cup Series and comes away with a 7th place finish and was second going into turn 3 on the final lap of the summer race in Daytona. I thought he had a shot to win it. And I think that's part of why you have to defend Retzlaff here in this situation, because he, I think, was making the move that best gave him the opportunity to get, if not a win, at least the highest finish that he could get. Maybe if he and the 21 had even gotten a bigger run than they did, the 62 could have cleared the 8, and then he pulls out coming out of 4, and maybe we're talking about Parker Retzlaff and Beard Motorsports with an even bigger upset win than we're talking about here, one that is with a part-time open team that only runs these super speedway races every year, but wouldn't shake up the playoffs at all, but certainly gets a lot of stuff from RCR in terms of that technical alliance. So you can understand why, in a perfect world, you would want the 62 working with the 8 instead of a 21 in that situation. But again, I mean, how much do you want to ask of a guy who's only making his second start in the series, who is, just excited to be in the field, let alone having the opportunity to potentially win this race here, trying to gain all the experience he can, and you're going to come over the radio and tell him, hey, team orders here, you have to work with this guy instead of that guy. It's just another reason to hate team orders, in my opinion. I think you could argue he made the wrong decision from a business perspective, from a team orders perspective. But I thought we hated team orders. I thought we didn't like seeing drivers being put into a box and being told you can only work with somebody who shares the name on the side of your car from a team or manufacturer perspective here. So I don't hold it against Parker Retzlaff at all. In fact, I think it's just the opposite. You have to commend him for a job well done and a fantastic finish. And he's had some of these in Xfinity before at this track as well. I think he's finished 4th and 3rd in the February race here the last couple of years in that series as well. So he's by no means a bad super speedway racer. He had an opportunity to get a great finish last night, and that's exactly what he did. You can't fault him for it.
Right. And then earlier you mentioned, Ben, about the 2 incidents that took place. The first being Michael McDowell, who got turned around in front of the pack. McDowell's car lifted off the ground onto his side before coming back to rest in a multi-car crash. Then we saw our second flip in the Cup Series in the last 2 races with Josh Berry, who got into the air, flipped and slid on his roof on the backstretch into the inside wall upside down. NASCAR added an extra shark fin to the cars after Corey LaJoie flipped the previous week at Michigan. So what are your thoughts on these 2 incidents, and does NASCAR need to consider some serious changes to the next-gen car after the latest change didn't seem to work?
Well, I'll start with a positive, and credit to the NBC broadcast for pointing this out as well. For all the, I think, justified criticism that the next-gen car has gotten in terms of safety, the roof integrity of the roof of Josh Berry's car certainly held up, and we have to be thankful for that, because that was a very frightening incident. Because as Jeff Burton said, watching the replay last night, when Josh Berry's upside down in that car, he's hanging from his safety harness and his belts inside the driver's seat. He's not on the ground in the driver's seat, so to speak. He's literally hanging from the belts, and so to have that impact head on into the wall upside down only further compounds how hard of a hit, how difficult of a hit that is to watch. So we are so grateful and thankful that Josh Berry is all right and was able to walk away from that. So you can certainly chalk up a victory for the next gen car from that perspective. But it was kind of ironic. They were singing the next gen's praises when Michael McDowell got airborne and saying, maybe if this had happened last week, he would have gone up and over all the way, and we would have had an incident like we saw with Tony Stewart at Talladega all those years ago, I think in 2012. That's what the incident reminded me of, a very similar incident where the leader gets turned and the air gets under the car in the corner, and really there's nowhere for anybody in the field to go. Adam brings up another good example as well, Ricky Craven's flip in Talladega in the 90s as well. Certainly a comparable situation there. But I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm certainly unqualified to answer this question because I don't have a background in science or physics or engineering. I'm a slightest. My parents certainly do, but I chose to go down a completely different field with my career here in the motorsports media world. So I can't say that I have any sort of ideas or solutions from an engineering perspective that would fix all these things. I can only tell you as a concerned race fan last night, the fact that they thought they had a solution and we thought we saw that solution play out. And maybe we did. Maybe if that crash had happened 2 weeks ago, enough air would have gotten underneath McDowell's car, but that one would have been even worse and Barry would have flipped regardless here. I don't think that the solution should be taking even more speed out of these cars so that we're seeing top speeds of 160 miles an hour at Daytona. I think some people were proposing that and saying, once you're up that high in the triple digits, can you really tell the difference? And we'd still have this close pack style racing and everything. Absolutely not. That's not the solution, in my opinion, at all. And I think there's certainly merit to what Dale Earnhardt Jr. said on his podcast after the LaJoie flip. You're pushing 200 miles an hour in these cars. It's inevitable that the laws of physics will lift the car up when it gets turned around like that, despite the roof flaps, despite these shark fins or whatever. Everything that we can do to mitigate that risk is great, but it's still ultimately going to be a risk at the end of the day, no matter how much effort we put into it. So I don't know. I think that it certainly doesn't hurt to take Josh Berry's car back to R&D. I'm sure they did the same with Corey LaJoie last week in Michigan, and I'm sure they're going to study these incidents and try to find out what they can do to at least mitigate that risk going forward in the future. But are we ever going to eliminate that risk entirely? I think that that's a losing battle, and I think we need to acknowledge that and remember that, and we need to respect these drivers and respect what they do even more so on nights like this, because we do get those reminders from time to time, but this is a dangerous sport. And one more thing real quick, and then we'll lead into Formula One here. Thank goodness Alex Bowman is okay. That was something that I think got overshadowed quite a bit as well with the flips, because when McDowell came back down onto the track, if Bowman's car had been just a couple of feet further back, it seems to me that it would have gone in right in Bowman's window net, and who knows what damage could have been done there. That might have been a Ryan Newman 2020 situation, and thank goodness that Alex Bowman was all right there, and that incident wasn't worse than it was there. But again, that's further proof, I think, that this is a very serious issue, because you can make the cars as safe as you can possibly make them. When a car gets airborne, it's not just the driver that's up in the air that could negatively impact. It's every other driver around them, because you just never know where these cars are going to land, where they're going to hit. And they don't look like it when they're flipping in the air like that, but these are 3,400 pound beasts of stock cars here that are flipping around like that. We don't need that as much as we can help it. So I certainly hope that they take a look at this and try to mitigate that risk. But again, you have to acknowledge that you're never going to eliminate that risk entirely. We'll move on here to Formula One, and we'll bring Kobe back in. Let's see, there we go. And Kobe, speaking of championship battles heating up in IndyCar potentially, who would have thought this at the start of the year? But we might have one on our hands here in the world of Formula One racing.
Yeah, Ben, what world are we in? Are we back? Are we heading back to a few years ago when Formula One was actually competitive? I'm almost scared to believe that it's too good to be true right now. But hey, I'll take whatever I can get these days in Formula One. And today, Lando Norris was the driver who started on pole position, but he had some difficulties at the start. It came to haunt him as Max Verstappen convincingly took the lead heading down into turn one. However, Norris fought back, who later retook the lead on lap 18, and he never looked back there. The McLaren driver beat Verstappen on the Red Bull driver's home track by a whopping 22.896 seconds. And I'll be honest, guys, when I saw that margin of victory, I actually had to do a double take. Yeah, I didn't get to see the race live. Got some highlights during the afternoon, so I couldn't believe that like a McLaren beating a Red Bull by over 20 seconds at the Red Bull driver's home track. Just remarkable. I'm going to start off with you on this question, Linnea. Were you surprised by Norris's margin of victory, especially when you consider that he lost the lead on the start? In a way, he pulled a Verstappen-like beatdown. I'm Verstappen.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised by Norris's win, especially because of the start. Norris just didn't have the launch that he needed to maintain his position of pole, but he certainly had the pace to catch up to Verstappen. I think it's important to point out, Kobe, you said a Verstappen-like beatdown on Verstappen. I think that's completely true. I think it's important to point out that it was the first time a driver other than Max Verstappen himself has won by more than a 10-second margin in almost 2.5 years. I believe the last time was Charles Leclerc in the Australian Grand Prix. I think that the fact that Norris was able to win by double that margin with his pace today is what really surprised me, especially after losing the start and only gaining his lead on lap 18. I think that fact alone shows McLaren's competitiveness with Red Bull this season, especially given that it was Verstappen's home track. But I think it'll be interesting to see if they can maintain this for the rest of the season. Ben, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, for sure, Linnea. And I think that, you hit the nail on the head there, and I'll even go one further. I think it's the largest margin of victory period by a non-Verstappen driver since Lewis Hamilton in Saudi Arabia in 2021. If I have my stats right there, I feel like I saw that on motorsport.com. They were bringing up the margin again. Just incredible, especially considering that this is Verstappen's backyard. He had the entire crowd. I mean, believe me, those orange, that sea of orange that you saw in the grandstands, those maybe some McLaren fans in there, but they're primarily Dutch fans cheering on their home driver and Max Verstappen. And it's as big of a home court or home field advantage, so to speak, as you can possibly imagine. That's why I think we all picked Verstappen to win this race. And I almost fired up that tweet again after he led into the opening corner, like Max Verstappen wins the Dutch Grand Prix in all caps, because I thought that was it, that he was just going to drive away and be home free there. But that pace that Norris showed in qualifying with that McLaren fired back up, and he got the lead back again and never looked back. And not only did he never look back, he drove away. It was never in doubt. And the fact that it happened at the Dutch Grand Prix, I think this is a massive wake-up call. I still think Verstappen is the championship favorite. We'll get into that here in just a moment. But, again, it's going to be a situation where you don't want to count your chickens before they hatch here. And who would have thought that we would be talking after the Dutch Grand Prix about Max Verstappen having a real championship battle that he's got to watch out for? I thought he maybe would have the championship clinched at this point. He was going to be so dominant. Even Sergio Perez was racking up second place finishes at the start of the year. It looked like Red Bull had an insurmountable lead over the rest of the field here. I certainly didn't expect McLaren to be the team that was going to take the fight to them. But here we are. Lando Norris picks up another win today and continues to close that gap and continues to tease us that maybe, just maybe, we're going to actually get an actual championship battle to close out this year. It's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, and to his credit, our own Joshua Birch called this, just over a year ago. Remember, Ben? Our own Joshua Birch said that when Red Bull got that penalty with the cost cap, he said when we get a little deeper into the 2024 season, that's when you'll start to see Red Bull's advantage go away. And he called that to a T. So well done there, Josh. I know a lot of us, at the time we were thinking, yeah, right, that's probably going to happen. But look where we are now. Exactly what Josh said back then has come true. I'm going to try to go back on our YouTube channel and try to find that clip of Josh saying it, but it probably is going to be a very difficult challenge. But it's been quite a surprise this year in 2024 after the first few races. Ben, Linnea, I was thinking that, yeah, this season's already over. I said Max Verstappen is going to dominate this season. And by the time we get to summer break, the championship's already going to be over. But it really seems like, McLaren has a car that can truly take the fight to Red Bull on a more consistent basis now. And if McLaren keeps this up, there's no telling what the points are going to look like at the end of the season. It definitely surprised me that Lando Norris was able to pull away from Verstappen once he got by him, never looking back. And I also want to look at this situation as, looking at Lando Norris and how much he's grown as a driver. You remember that race back in Russia when it looked like that he was going to win that one, and ended up throwing it away. And we've seen time and time again, when he wasn't battling for the win, it was battling for a good points finish and end up throwing that away as well. Now Lando Norris is, starting to, develop those closer skills where he can where he can go out there, do what he needs to do, not make the mistakes, and end up getting the race victory. And that's exactly what we saw today. So it was a job well done by Norris. So I wanted to ask you a follow up. I'm gonna start off with you this time, Ben. Does Norris's victory today prove that McLaren is a threat not only for the Constructors' Championship, but perhaps the Drivers' Championship as well?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the constructors, you can almost say, even though Red Bull still has the slight advantage here, I think if looking at it here, it's only down to 30 points. But with where Perez is running, he hasn't had a top 4 finish since Miami earlier this season. That shows you just how much of a struggle it's been for him. I think this was actually his best finish since Miami here, 6th place today, which just really puts into perspective how much he's been struggling. So, I think that the constructors is certainly tilting in favor of McLaren here, even though Red Bull still has a slight lead. I think McLaren have overtaken them as the favorites to win the constructors this year. In terms of the drivers, I think, looking at the math here, Norris could win every race. Verstappen could finish second in every race. All he would need to do is follow Norris home. And I think Verstappen, I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head here. I think Verstappen would still win the championship by about 6 or 7 points. So if Max does everything that he needs to do, he still has almost a 3-race gap in terms of, getting 25 points for when he's up 70 now on Norris. It's certainly his to lose. But if Max Verstappen continues to have race weekends where the Red Bull just doesn't take to the track for whatever reason, he only is able to come away with 4th or 5th place points, doesn't even finish on the podium. And if McLaren can do what Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari could not do in 2017 and 2018, and maximize every weekend, be mistake-free, get their strategies right, and continue racking off podiums, and especially those race wins, I think it's certainly within reach. Now, Red Bull certainly also have an advantage in terms of their second car. If they decide that the constructors is out of reach, I think they're going to have no problem telling Sergio Perez to pit from 5th or 6th place on the last lap to take the fastest lap point away from Lando Norris, and that could potentially play in the Red Bull's favor as well. I mean, we saw Verstappen and Hamilton in 2021. They went into the last race tied down to the half point. So don't think that those fastest lap points might not come back to make a difference. Maybe don't think that Oscar Piastri's win in Hungary might not come back to make a difference here. I mean, if Norris loses this championship, you better hope he loses it by more than 7 points, because then we're going to be talking about that whole team orders debate once again as well. So when it comes to constructors, I think McLaren are now solidly the favorites. I still think Verstappen is the driver's favorite, but it is by no means over, and we're going to have to wait and see over these next few races. This is a very critical stretch. If Lando Norris can go out, win a couple more races, and further establish himself as somebody that can be a weekly contender, if McLaren can do the same thing, the championship fight, as far as I'm concerned, on the driver's side, is wide open.
Yeah, I think I also agree. McLaren is definitely on the radar for constructors and the Constructors' Championship. And I think given Norris's performance today, I think he could definitely be considered for the drivers as well. McLaren had the pace today, but it is important to point out that Verstappen did still have a better jump at the start. Ben, you mentioned that Verstappen basically just needs to follow Norris home, if the math on that is correct. And he needs to do what he needs to do. And historically, Verstappen is incredibly good at doing that. So I think it is more of a toss-up for the Drivers' Championship. I think there's more wiggle room there, and Verstappen is still the favorite for that. I think next week we have Monza, which is a notoriously difficult track, and Verstappen did win that last year. And I think that he'll be a lot more aggressive, given that he just lost at his home track. So you never know how the rest of the season will play out, but I do think McLaren made a really big statement with their pace today. And then also for the constructors, it's important, like you mentioned, Ben, to consider their teammates, how Checo's doing, and also Piastri, which we're going to get into in a second.
Yeah, for sure. But I also agree that McLaren is definitely going to be a threat for the Constructors' Championship. And looking at the Drivers' Championship, like we were saying during the IndyCar section about Alex Palou, that is probably, he's likely to be the IndyCar champion, but you just never know. And just I can't even talk, but it's the exact same thing in Formula One with Max Verstappen. He's probably still going to end up winning the championship, but like you're saying, Ben, it's not over. at all yet. There's no telling what's going to happen moving forward, and that's what I really like about Formula One right now. The unpredictability is finally back for the first time since 2021, which is absolutely fantastic for all the people who love Formula One all over the world. Yeah, for the longest time now, it seemed like it's just been the Max Verstappen show, and that it was a guaranteed Max victory almost every single race, minus some circumstances happening every now and then. But now you go into Formula One Grand Prix races, these last handful of races, you have no idea who's going to win. I wouldn't have predicted at the beginning of the year that Max Verstappen would have gone winless for over 2 months, and a winless streak that still continues to go on as we head into the next race weekend. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this championship battle moving forward. Are we going to find out that Red Bull made their own decision to keep Sergio Perez and not replace him with someone who can be a little bit more consistent at car and get them the points they need in the Constructors Championship? Yeah, so there's still a whole bunch of questions that are going to be answered as we get deeper into the 2024 Formula One season. And while it was all smiles for Norris, his teammate Oscar Piastri was unable to join him on the podium because Piastri, he slipped back to fourth behind Ferrari's Charles Leclerc. Linnell, when McLaren has a car that can beat Verstappen by over 20 seconds, does Piastri need to make sure he's finishing on the podium to pull his weight in the constructors title fight? I'm sure Oscar Piastri doesn't want to become McLaren's version of Sergio Perez, but I wouldn't even label him as that right now.
Yeah, I think that Piastri definitely needs to make sure he's pulling his weight. P4 did gain McLaren good points, but when Norris's car is more than 20 seconds ahead of Verstappen, you'd kind of expect that pace to also be reflected in Piastri's car. Going back to what was mentioned in the pre-race discussion, actually, it was kind of like discussed about a possible McLaren 1-2 finish, and it was said that it was very dependent on the start of the race. I think this is exactly true. Although Norris lost the first place position, he was able to hold on to Verstappen and gain it back, where Piastri did slip back into fourth. So I think going forward, I think there would be a lot more pressure on Piastri to start getting podium finishes to keep them up. But I do think he's still definitely getting McLaren the good points that they need.
Yeah, I don't know if it says much, Oscar Piastri not pulling his weight, because he did still finish fourth today, and like we mentioned, Checo hasn't been able to say that since Miami, for crying out loud, despite the fact that, well, Red Bull, he could maybe argue, now only have the second best car. They still have a very good car, and Checo has not been able to maximize that. I think the driver of the day was Charles Leclerc, not Lando Norris, with all due respect. Don't get me wrong, Norris was absolutely sensational to have that margin of victory on Max Verstappen, but Charles Leclerc, I think it's become clear at this point, Ferrari are certainly in the bottom half of the top four, big four teams here, so to speak. I know Leclerc obviously got his victory earlier this year, as did Carlos Sainz, but the pace the last few races has made it very clear and very apparent, I think, that the battle is between McLaren and Red Bull, and you could maybe even argue Mercedes has had more pace over the last several weekends. I know they didn't have such a great weekend here in Zandvoort, but Leclerc to get a podium for Ferrari, I think, absolutely massive. He would have been my vote for driver of the day. And you do have to look at Oscar Piastri letting him get that podium, despite the fact that Piastri started in third, and think, these points are super valuable. Maybe he probably should have been there with his teammate up on the podium and hung on to that third place spot. So I think that Piastri certainly needs to do a better job of making sure that he's on the podium as much as he possibly can be, considering McLaren probably have the best car at a lot of the tracks that we're going to right now. But at the same time, I don't think you need to hit the panic button or ring the alarm bells for Oscar Piastri here either. Fourth place is still a very solid day. Like Linnea said, it does get McLaren 12 solid championship points on their constructors battle. And when you look at it this way, Norris beat Verstappen and Piastri still beat Perez. So that's really all he needs to do to continue to close the gap. And there's plenty of time left to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Oscar Piastri is going to be perfectly fine. And it's funny that, we're talking about Piastri in this way, because it was just last year on this show, we were asking if Oscar Piastri was the number one driver over Lando Norris. And now we're talking about Piastri needing to pull his weight in the constructors title fight. I don't really have much more to add there, but really looking forward to seeing what Norris and Piastri are able to do here down the stretch. And I think the constructors title battle is just going to continue to get tighter and tighter. And as we get down to the wire, it's going to be fun to watch and see if McLaren can truly take the fight to Red Bull and get around them in the constructors. I have a feeling, if we get the gap down, to like one race gap, you're gonna start seeing Red Bull, pulling their hairs out, and they're gonna go into like a mini panic mode here because they want this constructors title. Entering the season, we thought Red Bull had the drivers and constructors championship locked down before we even did lights out and away we go at the start of this season. Yeah, so it's gonna be fun. And one team that did not have a good day was the Kick Sauber's duo of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. While everyone finished underpowered, Bottas and Zhou were 19th and 20th respectively, 2 laps off the pace. They're the only drivers not to score any points this season, and with a season best of only 13th place, Bottas has the dubious distinction of being 21st in a 20-driver championship thanks to Ollie Behrman's points in Saudi Arabia. Ben, are you surprised by how far off the pace the Sauber team has been this season? I know on a couple of episodes of Grit Tonight, I believe it was last month, a few weeks ago, whatever. We were talking about all of the turmoil been going on behind the scenes because while the team is still, Sauber now is going to become Audi, in just a couple of years' times, and there's been a lot of dysfunction going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm shocked. I am a little surprised that they've been this bad. I'm a little surprised that Valtteri Bottas hasn't finished better than 13th all season, and by virtue of the fact that Guanyu Zhou has an 11th place finish and Logan Sargent also has an 11th place finish, it leaves him 21st in a 20 driver championship, which I guess somebody has to be in that position given what Ollie Behrman did earlier this year, but wouldn't expect it to be a veteran like Valtteri Bottas. I think really one of the most underrated drivers of our generation. I still believe he's one of the best number 2 drivers in the history of the sport, at least in the modern era, so to speak. Multi-time race winner, never missed Q3 with Mercedes. I mean, the man is a reliable. I mean, say what you will about him not being able to match Lewis Hamilton's pace consistently. He's still a very good driver in his own right. And it is very frustrating to see him struggling as much as he is here. I know Brock Beard hasn't done Formula Last One articles in several years here, but we'd be writing a article on the Sauber duo here today, which is unfortunate for them again that they can't seem to find the pace right now. Zhou, especially, I feel badly for him not having more pace in that car, but he can unlock. And who knows what Valtteri Bottas's future might hold as well. Like you mentioned, Kobe, a lot of turmoil going on behind the scenes, but at the same time, you feel like everybody would be fired up and energetic that there, are good things coming on the horizon with the Audi takeover. So I don't know. I guess it's not too surprising to see them struggling a little bit, knowing that there are big changes that are coming, probably that are already starting to take effect here. But if you told me that they would be the team that was 10th in the constructors, they'd be the only team that hasn't scored a point so far this year yet. Yeah, it is a little bit surprising to me. I think that, I probably would have told you that would be Alpine based on how Alpine started the year, or maybe Williams or Haas, given their history over the last several seasons. I feel like if anything, when they were Alfa Romeo Sauber, they had a history of kind of punching above their weight on certain weekends, so to speak here. They certainly haven't been able to do that this year, and that's been pretty unfortunate to see.
Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add. I think that they've continued to struggle with the wind and other track conditions, and I think it's definitely disappointing for the drivers and the team to be so far off pace. I think hopefully they can make some changes before next weekend, but like you were saying, Ben, it is really disappointing, especially for Bottas since he was such a strong driver with Mercedes. We all know his potential, and we know that he could be so far up there. So I think it's really hard to watch the team struggle so much with their car.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely disappointing for Sauber. Like Ben was saying, this is supposed to be an exciting time for the team. They're going to become a full-blown Audi factory Formula One program. Always super exciting whenever a new manufacturer is going to enter the sport like this. But as I've been saying, in the last month or two, we've been having Grit Tonight shows talking about what's going on at Sauber, how they brought in Andrea Seidel from McLaren, and that didn't work out, so they ended up getting rid of him. Then they brought in Mattia Binotto, who he was very controversial during his time at Ferrari because they felt like he didn't really do anything to improve the program. Ferrari just things seemed to get constantly worse behind him and all that. Yeah, so there's just been a lot of things going on with that organization. And whenever I read something in the media about Sauber, is usually negative about how morale is low within the team, and that's not good when you have a new manufacturer like Audi come on board. You should be very excited. And yeah, things aren't going well right now. 2025 is looking to be a lame duck year, so to speak. And then 2026, when the full operation comes on board, people would be very excited to see what Audi can do. But given where they are right now, it's very hard to get excited about a program that's really struggling right now. And I wanted to ask you guys a follow-up question here, starting with you, Ben, and then Linnea to finish off with that. We talked about Valtteri Bottas been 21st in a 20 driver championship. And we know Formula One silly season is still far from over, have a few more seats left to fill. But whenever we talk about the seats that are available, not once have I heard Valtteri Bottas's name mentioned for any of those set seats. So my question for the both of you, do you think that we could be witnessing the end of Valtteri Bottas's Formula One career?
Unfortunately, yes. And again, like I mean, I know Josh and I really got into it when I suggested this, but I said when we were talking about we had that emergency breaking news show about Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari, who could be on the short list for Mercedes, and is Kimi Antonelli going to be ready or not? And of course, we all expect him to be the answer to that question at this point. But I said, hey, listen, why not Valtteri Bottas? He certainly knows the facilities better than anybody else. I'm sure he knows a lot of people over at the team better than anybody else. And he's somebody who I think certainly at this point in his career would be a reliable second driver to George Russell as Russell looks to take the next step towards being a contender for a World Drivers' Championship. And he could be that veteran voice in the paddock for Mercedes. And, whether it's with Mercedes or with Sauber or not, I think, is he ever going to win a championship? I don't think he's at that level, but I still think he's a very talented driver in his own right, who on his best day is capable of winning races and contributing to a constructor championship level organization as he did with Mercedes for all those years. So it would be a shame to see him go. He's just pulling him up here. He turns 35 this week. So, I guess when you get up to that age in Formula One, sometimes, you get kind of shoved aside from the driver market as the young rookies are coming up. So I guess it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that this may be the end for him. But if it is, I think it's unfortunate because I think that he certainly has a lot to offer several teams on the grid. There just might not be an opening for him. But then again, there were years where there wasn't an opening for, the Kevin Magnusons and Nico Hulkenbergs of the world. They spent a couple of years away and then came back. So it might not be the end for all time for Valtteri Bottas, but he might have to take a sabbatical here and maybe go explore racing in another series, which again, I think would be unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that would be really hard if this is his last season, especially given the way that his team is performing. Like you said, Ben, he has an incredible history and lots of points under his belt. And I think that it would be pretty much a really big bummer to see him go. I know Mercedes does have that extra seat. I don't know if they would pull him up or not for that. He has worked with George Russell once before and, knows the team dynamic. So I think that would be a really interesting play if Mercedes did do that. But also, like you said, Ben, he could leave for a few years and come back. But I do hope that this isn't his last season. And I hope that they find a spot for him. But it's not looking too great at the moment.
And let me just follow up one more thing here, and then we can move on. But just pulled up the stats here. There are 776 drivers that have started a Grand Prix. 115 of them have won a race. Only 35 have won 10 races or more. Valtteri Bottas is one of those 35. So again, say what you will about his, what he says on the radio, to whom it may concern, or, being somebody that thinks he can take the fight to Lewis Hamilton, be a championship contender, and then falling apart in the middle of the season, not being able to hold that pace. He won 10 races. I mean, how many drivers can say that they won 10 races, and how many drivers can say that they were a part of 5 consecutive Constructors' Championships? Of course, everybody forgets that Mercedes won it in 2021 with what happened on the driver's side of things, but Valtteri played a huge part in that, and I don't think that can be overlooked when it comes to his F1 legacy.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think Valtteri Bottas gets the respect that he deserves. You mentioned, Ben, he winning 10 races in Formula One competition. How many drivers can say, that they've reached that double-digit mark at the pinnacle of motorsport? Most drivers, never win a Formula One race, given the way, this type of racing is. So I think Valtteri definitely deserves a lot more respect than he gets. And it would be super unfortunate if this is the end of his Formula One career, but I think he'll probably have some options to go race elsewhere. I was just reading a month ago, that some IndyCar teams had potentially expressed some interest in Valtteri Bottas's services, and we know silly season in IndyCar right now is pretty crazy. So I wouldn't put it past Valtteri Bottas for landing an IndyCar ride somewhere, and that would totally shake up the silly season on that side of the pond. And I believe we'll put the F1 conversation to rest now, because then we have a little bit of IMSA to talk about from VIR.
It's a shame Bottas never won Monaco, because then if he were to win the Indianapolis 500 coming over to IndyCar, we could be having the Triple Crown conversations again. So we'll see what the future holds for him. Certainly wish him nothing but the best. Hopefully he's got a future in F1 for a couple more years. But if not, I'm sure there's somebody out there in some other series that would certainly love to have him as a driver. But for now, we move on to IMSA. They were in action with GTP and the LMP2 classes, GTP and LMP2 classes were off this weekend. We had the annual GT-only race at Virginia International Raceway of GTD Pro and GTD classes in action. And after dominating GTD last year, Paul Miller Racing stepped up to GTD Pro this year and finally got its first class win today in the Michelin GT Challenge at VIR. A strong performance from the number one BMW's drivers, Brian Sellers and Madison Snow. A full course caution late in the race allowed the field to close the gap, but they weren't denied today in a dominant effort. Kobe, given how strong Paul Miller Racing performed in GTD last year, are you surprised it took them this late in the season to finally win in the GTD Pro class?
Well, Ben, I think the best way to answer that question is yes and no. And I'm going to start off by saying yes, it is a surprise given how strong they've been, in GTD last year. You remember they won almost every single race of the GTD class, which is just a remarkable feat. But I guess when you're that strong, beating up on the competition, so to speak, then you're going to want to go out there and find a different challenge. And we know going up to the GTD Pro class, although it is smaller, compared to GTD, that the competition is going to be a lot more fierce, with all of those factory-backed operations that they have, all pro driver lineups, that it was going to be a challenge for this team. So I figured, they were dominating GTD, so they can go into GTD Pro and get the get the job done based on what we saw from them last year. But also, like I said, it's a different animal in GTD Pro. So naturally, with tougher competition, it was going to be harder for them to go out there and get that win. But they finally done it. So good job to Brian Sellers and Madison Snow for getting the job done in the Michelin GT Challenge.
All right. Well, meanwhile, the number 32 Korthoff Preston Motorsports Mercedes of Mikhail Grenier and Kenton Cook. Hopefully I got those names right. Apologize if I didn't. But they won the GTD class as well. And VIR is in the books. That concludes the sprint races in 2024 as we close out the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship with 2 endurance races and all 4 classes in action. On September 22nd, there's a 6-hour race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Road Course for TireRack.com Battle on the Bricks. And then the season finale to wrap things up on October 12th, 10 hours of racing at Matul Petit Le Mans.
Yeah. And with that said, we're going to roll into our Grid 1 shining moment from this racing weekend. So down in the comments below, let us know the one moment that stood out to you the most, whether it was from Formula One, NASCAR, or IndyCar. And Linnea, since this is your very first show at Grid Network, we're going to let you go first. What's your Grid 1 shining moment?
Thank you. My great one shining moment was what I talked about most today, which was Norris winning. This is a little bit more of a personal note, but I started watching F1 during his rookie season, and I kind of chose him as my favorite driver that season specifically because he was a rookie. That was before I knew any of the statistics or history of any of the drivers, so I didn't know too much. And obviously my favorites have changed, but I think it was really interesting to see how far of a lead he got and the pace that McLaren has now. I know that it wasn't super exciting up on his end. It kind of like after lap 18, he kind of just held his pace, and that there was a lot more going on in the rest of the pack. But I do think that this competitiveness with McLaren and Red Bull is really interesting. And I'm really excited to see where it goes for the rest of the F1 season.
Well, I think Harrison Burton is too obvious. The Wood brothers are too obvious, certainly deserving of one shining moment. But I'm going to shout out some other drivers as well. Cody Ware, fantastic run in 4th place for the Rick Ware Racing number 15. Parker Retzlaff, like we mentioned, 7th place for Beard Motorsports. And then Joey Gase in the 44 New York Racing car, tying that team's best finish with a 20th place. I know, but that doesn't sound super impressive on paper for most teams. But for a team like that that's been struggling the last few years to even get to a racetrack that's been going through a carousel of drivers in the driver's seat as well. You've seen J.J. Yaley, Greg Biffle, all sorts of names in that car. Joey Gase, a solid top 20 effort, avoiding all the carnage at Daytona. Not a bad night for that team.
And for my one shining moment this week, I got to give a call to Lee Diffie. This man continues to impress me time and time again. It makes me wonder, how is there enough space in his head for all the knowledge that he has to remember? It's just absolutely remarkable. If you're someone who wants to be in broadcasting, Lee Diffie is the gold standard. You need to look at him and try to model yourself after him. And it's just amazing, because for a long time he's been the voice of the NTT IndyCar series, called the last several Indy 500s on NBC. So that's where he's mostly been. He's also been the voice of NBC's track and field coverage as well, and calling the Olympics. If you watch track and field, you heard him call all of the races, at the summer games in Paris, France. Yeah, so he just think about this for a minute. He had to, obviously he, very close inside the IndyCar paddock. He knows all the stories and all the stats over there. And then he has to shift over to track and field, and he has to get up to speed to all those stories. And now for the first time in several years, Lee Diffie's dropped into the NASCAR Cup Series booth. And you think, with all this focus on IndyCar and track and field and the Olympics and all of that, how on earth is he gonna, get up to speed so quickly in NASCAR? And like you said earlier, Ben, Lee Diffie talked about NASCAR like he never left at all, like he's been in the booth for several years, and he didn't take a single race off. So I thought it was very impressive, because I understand, when you're doing these races, you have to do a lot of homework, you have to study a lot, get up to speed. And when Lee Diffie was talking about all the different storylines that have been going on throughout the 2024 NASCAR season, he was up to date with absolutely everything, and there was no hesitation at all. And I thought that was just really spectacular. Glad to have him back on our side of things in the racing world. So well done, Lee Diffie. Looking forward to seeing him close out the year.
And before I close out the show, I'm going to follow up on what Kobe said here, because that's absolutely a shining moment, I think, all across social media, except the Facebook comments. We don't need to go into what they were thinking about an Australian voice calling the NASCAR Cup Series race in Daytona. But that's just it. I mean, who would have thought? And I know Matthew Owen said this on Grid Tonight this week as well, but a guy who's originally from Australia came to the United Kingdom and then the United States. So he was trying to build out his career in the world of motorsports, grew up racing motorcycles, and then once he got into the world of broadcasting, has done a little bit of everything, like you mentioned, Kobe. It's not just motorsports or F1, IndyCar, NASCAR, Rallycross, the Dakar Rally, MotoGP, Supercross, you name it, he's done it. Sports car racing. He's gone to the Olympics for NBC. He's done bobsled, luge, and skeleton during the Winter Games. He did rowing at the Rio Olympic Games and is now NBC's main voice for track and field. And he is an absolute pro in everything that he does. And I think people sometimes don't realize just how much homework you have to do as a play-by-play voice. I mean, think of all the different events that he just called over in Paris, and all the names that he had to learn, all the stories that he had to learn going into the Olympics to do as good of a job he did. And then to come back over here and do something completely different, coming back to NASCAR for the first time in half a decade as the play-by-play voice, looked like he never left. And we are very lucky to have him closing out the year from NASCAR Cup Series. And no disrespect to Rick Allen either. He gets to finish out the year on the Xfinity broadcast as well. So I think all around, it's a great time for NASCAR and NBC, and I think they have a lot to look forward to and a lot to be proud of, given how their broadcast went last night. So well done to the entire team there. Certainly worthy of a one shining moment. Well, tomorrow on Grid Encore, Brandon and I will recap the Xfinity Series race at Daytona, as well as the ARCA and ARCA East combo race in Milwaukee, the truck race at Milwaukee, and Indy next at Portland. And on Wednesday, Kobe will be back with Grid Tonight to recap the latest motorsports news, including Shane Van Gisbergen going full-time in the Cup Series next year. Certainly didn't have the night last night that he was hoping for, but I think the news a couple hours earlier that night has to have his spirits pretty high as well. Great opportunity for him. More on that later in the week, as well as Women in Motorsport. We'll be recapping the F1 Academy doubleheader at Zandvoort. And then we'll do it all over again with our regular Grid Live programming next weekend. So be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any of that or any of our upcoming programs or videos. For Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight and the newest member of our team, Linnea Jackson from UCLA Radio, I'm Ben Schneider from Grid Encore and LastCar.info. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your night.